The Situation Room at the White House had always been a theater of control, precision, and strategic calm, a cathedral of American authority wrapped in bulletproof certainty. But not today. Today, the oxygen in the room carried an edge like a courtroom before a surprise verdict. The polished American walnut table, carved from a single trunk centuries old, reflected a dozen powerful faces, each seated according to a ritual older than the current administration itself. Military insignias gleamed under surgical overhead lights. Digital displays cycled through silent satellite feeds. Classified folders lay unopened, like landmines of knowledge waiting for detonation. Seated at the far end of the table was Jasmine Crockett, a woman not usually invited to this level of briefing. Her presence here had triggered side glances, a few veiled smirks, and at least one unmuted whisper. She's not even Senate intel. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Her navy blue blazer bore no military flair, no decades of beltway sheen. Just a simple gold pin glinting in the light, the kind you earned in quiet, not through ceremony. She sat upright still, like a detonator wired for impact. To her right, exactly 6 inches from her palm, lay a standard manila envelope. But the envelope was anything but standard. Across from her, Donald Trump filled his chair like a man who had never truly shared space in his life. His red tie, longer than etiquette allowed, cut across his chest like a scar. His fingers beat a slow rhythm on the polished wood, tap, 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 like distant artillery. His smile was wide, too wide. He wasn't worried. Not yet. This was supposed to be a routine briefing, global flashpoints, economic instability, election interference, the usual theater. What he didn't know, the stage had been reset. What he didn't see. Behind Jasmine's calm was a precision plan assembled over 11 months by a bipartisan, off-the-books investigative network. What he didn't suspect, this meeting had been maneuvered, not scheduled, by forces far beyond the White House scheduler's reach. At the head of the table, the National Security Advisor sat stone still, her silver hair tied back in a braid of military neatness. To her left, the CIA director's weathered fingers clasped a black dossier marked with 5 separate agency seals. The Secretary of Defense, face carved by war and worry, looked toward Jasmine with the quiet anticipation of a soldier about to hear whether they were fighting shadows or monsters. The envelope was still untouched, but its weight, its quiet gravitational pull, had already begun to bend the room. It started 12 weeks ago, in a basement archive beneath the Library of Congress. Jasmine's team, 4 young data analysts, 2 forensic accountants, and a retired NSA linguist, discovered a pattern so complex, so deliberately buried, that even whispering it felt dangerous. It wasn't a document. It wasn't even digital. It was a financial rhythm, a metronome of money transfers between Trump-associated companies and a shell conglomerate based in Macau. At first, it looked like real estate expansion. Then it looked like tax avoidance. Then it stopped looking like anything legal. Jasmine didn't go public. She didn't leak it to the press. She flew to Berlin, then to Seoul. Then to a tiny cabin near Big Bear Lake where a former Treasury Deep analyst named Michael Brennan had built a wall-to-wall 3D model of Project Red Lantern, a Chinese financial infiltration program dating back to 2007. Everything Jasmine knew about corruption, about systems betrayal and American vulnerability, crumbled under the weight of what she now held. And so she returned to Washington, not to make a speech, but to light the fuse. Now the countdown was ending. Jasmine slid her fingers toward the envelope. Trump leaned forward slightly, not out of fear, but performance. He believed this would be another theatrical jab from a rising House star. He had heard worse, survived worse, beaten worse. What he didn't understand, not yet, was that every piece of his empire, every glossy tower, every luxury golf course, every offshore account connected to Chinese state-controlled banks was now connected in her hands. She looked up, met his eyes, and smiled, not wide, not warm, but with the solemnity of someone about to pronounce a sentence history would echo for decades. "Before we proceed with today's threat assessment," she said, her voice calm as a scalpel, "I believe there's a matter of national security that requires immediate attention." The room froze. Trump's fingers stopped mid-beat. The manila envelope turned ever so slightly under her fingertips. It concerns financial arrangements that may have compromised American sovereignty at the executive level. Gasps were stifled, heads turned, and in the sudden vacuum of silence, the Situation Room, the heart of American defense, began to beat to a new rhythm, one that Jasmine Crockett now conducted. Jasmine Crockett's fingers paused just above the envelope, letting the silence stretch. No one in the room moved. Not the CIA director, whose gray eyes narrowed behind rimless glasses. Not the Secretary of Defense, whose hand rested unconsciously on his sealed briefing folder like it were a weapon. And certainly not Donald Trump, who leaned back with calculated nonchalance, unaware that the mask he had worn for decades was about to splinter. Then, with the slow deliberation of a surgeon exposing bone, Jasmine unclasped the envelope. The metallic click echoed louder than it should have. From within, she removed the first document set, each page thick, official, stamped in red with the unmistakable insignia of the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. She laid the stack flat on the table. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't waver. It cut. 12 weeks ago, FinCEN finalized a restricted-level report cataloging over 47 suspicious activity reports filed by international financial institutions involving shell companies directly or indirectly controlled by the Trump Organization. She let the weight of the words land. These weren't isolated anomalies. They formed a pattern, a design, one that matches criteria established in Treasury Directive 4517, otherwise known as the Red Lantern Protocol. At the mention of that phrase, the CIA director's eyes twitched. So did the room. Most had heard whispers. Very few had ever seen the name spoken aloud, especially not by a House representative holding the floor in the Situation Room. Trump forced a smirk. "You're quoting ghost regulations now? Sounds like a tinfoil hat convention." Jasmine turned a single page and slid it toward the center of the table. "Let me tell you what's not a ghost." The paper was a SR, a suspicious activity report, filed by Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, the ICBC, and cross-reviewed by Deutsche Bank's Compliance Division. At the center, a $142 million real estate acquisition in Toronto, routed through 3 shell companies, all tied to a Cayman Islands holding group whose founding signature, stamped and notarized, bore the initials DJT. Jasmine continued, between 2011 and 2019, $417 million was moved through a network of 22 entities, many registered to addresses that don't exist. All of them shared compliance anomalies. All of them intersected with mainland China-based banking structures. All of them traceable, barely, to Trump Organization subsidiaries. She turned another page. This one was even worse. A FinCEN-linked memo from Ping An Bank, submitted under pressure from international compliance laws, highlighting a pattern of artificially inflated wire transfers tied to consulting services from New York entities to offices in Shenzhen. "These aren't passive accounts," Jasmine explained. "They're active nodes in what FinCEN analysts classified as a financial relay system designed for cross-border obfuscation and laundering of state-controlled capital." Trump leaned in, mock serious. "So China bought condos. Big deal. That's what capitalism is, sweetheart." Jasmine ignored the jab. She placed the next page down. It wasn't a bank document. It was a map. A diagram generated by forensic software used by counterintelligence analysts. It looked like a constellation made of ink. Dots and lines, red, blue, black. At the center, the Trump Organization. Radiating outward. 12 banks, 6 law firms, 3 data firms, and a cluster of entities with partial Chinese government ownership. It wasn't a map. It was a financial weapon system. "This structure was built over 13 years, Jasmine said. Its architecture mirrors methods outlined in a PLA white paper on strategic economic leverage dated 2005, classified under asymmetric influence doctrine. Now even the Secretary of Defense was looking up." Jasmine continued, "What you built, Mr. Trump, or what was built around you, is not just a laundering network. It's a framework for economic dependency that violates at least 6 statutes under the Foreign Agents Registration Act." Trump snorted. "I've been audited more than any man alive. If there was dirt, they'd have used it." This time Jasmine didn't answer. The answer came from the CIA director, who spoke for the first time. "The problem isn't whether there was dirt," he said quietly. "The problem is that it was cleaned too well." He leaned forward, eyes on the network map Jasmine had laid out. "We've seen this before. Once in Albania, same topology, same transactional architecture, but that one took down a prime minister." Trump sat back. His expression hardened. "You people think charts and memos mean treason. What a joke," Jasmine replied calmly. We think coordinated international debt manipulation that results in policy shifts benefiting Chinese state interests is a national security breach. She placed one final paper on the table, a FinCEN-flagged loan agreement signed in 2013 by a Trump subsidiary backed by Hong Kong-based EverVictory Group, a front company later exposed in a Senate intelligence memo for being controlled by a member of the Chinese Communist Party's Central Financial Commission. The interest rate, 0%. Duration, 27 years. Early termination clause, triggered by policy hostile behavior in the United States. Trump blinked. That was the first real reaction. And everyone in the room saw it. The national security advisor shifted in her seat. The CIA director leaned back, thinking. The Secretary of Defense took a breath, slow and heavy. Jasmine didn't look at Trump when she said her next line. She looked at the American seal in the center of the table. This wasn't just money, this was design, and you were either the architect or the door they walked through. Silence fell. The FinCEN files now sat in the open, a new kind of weapon, one that fired not bullets but truths sharp enough to puncture decades of illusion. The FinCEN documents still lay on the table, glowing with bureaucratic violence. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't done, not even close. She slid the map aside and reached back into the envelope. This time, what emerged wasn't paper. It was a black USB drive, military issue, unbranded. She placed it on the center of the table between Trump and the CIA director. "We acquired this 3 weeks ago," she said. "It was decrypted by a former signals analyst under NATO clearance protocols." With a nod, the CIA director connected the drive to the secure terminal embedded in the table. Monitors flickered. The room dimmed. A high-resolution image appeared across the Situation Room's wall-sized screen. It was a still photo, grainy, enhanced, but unmistakable. Donald Trump, seated in a luxury restaurant in Hong Kong. To his left, an executive from the China Investment Corporation, Beijing's sovereign wealth fund. To his right, a woman known to U.S. intelligence only as Phoenix 9, a code-named economic strategist previously identified in leaked MSS, Ministry of State Security, documents. The photo was dated October 23, 2015, weeks before Trump announced his presidential bid. "That dinner was unofficial," Trump said, his voice a bit lower. "I had business holdings in Asia. It wasn't classified." "No," Jasmine replied, "but what happened after was—" She tapped the table, and the next image loaded. It was surveillance footage, a slow pan of a Hong Kong elevator lobby. Trump steps in. So does Phoenix 9. A timestamp marks the hour, 1:16 a.m. No other details, no sound, just the doors closing. "This video was extracted from a compromised MSS internal server by Allied CyberOps," Jasmine explained. "It was never meant to leave the Chinese mainland." "You're trying to make this into some hotel scandal?" Trump spat, smirking. "I'm trying," Jasmine replied coldly, "to trace the activation point of Project Red Lantern." The room stilled. That name again. The National Security Advisor sat upright. "Red Lantern," she asked. "Are you saying it's real?" "Not only real," Jasmine said, "but it's already operational." She pulled another file from the envelope, this time thin but marked with the black seal of the NSA's SIGINT division. Inside, translated communications, intercepted in Mandarin, flagged as priority-level economic intelligence traffic. The messages were short, technical, sterile, but chilling. Phoenix 9 initiated Trump node. U.S. asset now feeding predictive economic positioning data. Lantern activation proceeding through Tier 3 channels. No visibility yet from CIA or Five Eyes. The final message displayed in red. Target unaware of full deployment purpose. Proceed. "Trump node," the CIA director echoed. That was an actual code name. "According to NSA linguists," Jasmine confirmed. "Yes." "How do we know it's him?" Trump barked. Jasmine walked to the display and tapped her finger against the next image. It was a bank transfer receipt. From a Chinese consultancy in Shenzhen to an LLC in Delaware controlled by Eric Trump. "This payment," she said, "was wired 2 hours after that meeting." Trump's jaw tightened. His arms folded, not in confidence now, but in containment. Jasmine returned to her seat and dropped the final piece of this segment onto the table. A voice file. "This one," she said, "comes from a satellite phone tap intercepted by Canadian cyber intel, recorded aboard a private yacht off the coast of Macau." She clicked the file. A few seconds of static. Then unmistakable. "He's predictable. He wants towers, not treaties. We'll buy his silence with cement and gold." Male voice. Mandarin accent, slightly distorted. "Is that supposed to be me?" Trump asked, almost laughing now. You're using James Bond tapes? No, the CIA director cut in. That's Guo Shenkun, former Chinese Minister of Public Security. We confirmed his voice print in 2019. Even the Secretary of Defense seemed stunned now. Jasmine pressed the final point. Project Red Lantern wasn't about spying. It was about building an American dependency, a Manchurian-style platform of influence seeded through debt, disguised as opportunity. The goal wasn't to destroy us, it was to acquire us. She paused. And you were their golden gateway. Trump stood now, hands flat on the table. This is theater. This is a democratic fever dream. This is Counterintelligence Protocol 117C, the CIA director interrupted, voice sharp, and I'm invoking it now. The room erupted in motion. NSA analysts stepped in from the hall. Doors locked. The Situation Room sealed. Jasmine, still seated, leaned back calmly. The surveillance doesn't lie. The transfers don't lie. The only question now is, how much of you is yours? And how much belongs to them? The air in the Situation Room had grown heavier, not from temperature, but from the gravity of what had just been shown. Trump remained standing as if defiance could outmuscle facts. But even he could feel it. The shape of the room had changed. Jasmine Crockett was no longer presenting a case. She was building a structure, and that structure had just become a cage. But the most damning brick hadn't even been laid yet. Jasmine reached for the final item in her folder, a white folder with no insignia, no stamps, no marks. This wasn't recovered from a bank, a satellite, or an intelligence partner, she said. This was resurrected by artificial intelligence. The CIA director's eyes narrowed. Jasmine continued. 2 years ago, a storage facility belonging to a data management firm, Titan Data, burned in Lower Manhattan. Fire investigators called it electrical failure. But deep in the charred wreckage, one drive survived, damaged, but intact. She slid the folder open. Inside, black and white screenshots, blurry, fragmented, email threads, snippets of code, file paths. This drive held fragments of an encrypted communication archive belonging to a defunct Trump Organization affiliate, Skyvault Strategies, LLC. The name rang familiar to the National Security Advisor. That shell company was closed in 2018, she said. Exactly, Jasmine replied, but its digital shadow remained. She motioned toward the table's screen. On cue, the NSA analyst connected a second, larger device, a matte black hard drive. Its contents were reconstructed by Argus, a NATO-developed AI built to revive corrupted digital material. Argus spent 6 weeks mapping fragmented hex code, packet headers, and residual timestamps. The result was this. On screen appeared a reconstructed email thread. Sender, phoenix9longdata.cn. Recipient, a Trumpeskyvault.io. Date, March 14, 2016. Subject, Predictive Index, version 4.3, Taiwan extension. We believe Phoenix is the same intelligence asset from the Hong Kong meeting, Jasmine said. But what matters isn't the name, it's the content. The email was simple. A table of data points followed by a request. We need anticipatory positioning on campaign talking points, or Taiwan, TPP, and Chinese capital restrictions. Deliverables due in 5 days. Include proposed alternatives that won't flag with State Department. Jasmine explained, this wasn't opposition research, it was message engineering. Chinese strategists weren't reacting to U.S. politics, they were shaping it. Trump's voice cracked the silence. You have no idea if that's real. Could have been planted. Argus confirmed digital integrity, the NSA analyst interrupted. We traced internal hash signatures across 3 servers in Germany. The probability of fabrication is less than 0.0%. Jasmine flipped to the next page. An internal memo drafted from Skyvault Strategies to a client entity listed as Chongjin Ventures. Chongjin, Jasmine said, is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Bank of China, filed under its Hong Kong branch. The memo listed policy phrasing suggestions. Phrases like jobs not war, fairness in trade, and China as a partner, not a threat, all of which later appeared verbatim in early Trump campaign speeches. The CIA director looked stunned. The Secretary of Defense leaned forward, mouth tightening. Jasmine wasn't done. One email, dated April 2016, included a briefing template, not for a campaign rally, but for a meeting with a Chinese logistics firm tied to rare earth minerals. On screen appeared the opening line. As discussed with Asset Phoenix, candidate will emphasize economic stability and mutually beneficial energy cooperation. What is Asset Phoenix? The national security advisor asked. That, Jasmine said, turning to Trump, was you. Trump barked a laugh, forced, guttural. You're saying the Chinese gave me talking points? That's the game? Jasmine turned over the final page, a screenshot of a payment invoice dated July 2016. From Shenzhen Development Holdings to Skyvault Strategies. Amount $11.4 million USD. Memo line, phase higher completion, data asset acquisition. It wasn't for your words, Jasmine said. It was for your willingness. Trump stepped back from the table, slowly. The performance was fading. His mouth opened, but no words came. His hand reached for a glass of water, but paused halfway. You think the American people care about this, he finally said. You think they understand algorithms and invoices? Jasmine's response was a whisper, but sharp enough to cut concrete. They don't need to understand algorithms, they just need to know you were speaking for someone else. The screen shut off. The room dimmed again. And for a few seconds, the only sound was the low hum of the air filtration system, keeping America's most secure room from suffocating on its own history. The room felt like a cathedral after judgment. Quiet, somber, suspended in history. Jasmine Crockett's presentation had already redefined the moment. What began as a national security briefing had mutated into a courtroom drama, with Trump at the defendant's table and a growing stack of evidence threatening to bury him in plain sight. And then the room blinked, not metaphorically, literally. For a split second, the Situation Room's main lights cut out. Only the emergency LEDs hummed to life. The digital monitors blinked to static, then rebooted. On the secure comms panel, red warning banners flickered. Signal integrity compromised, incoming anomaly, detected connection to SATCOM. 3 in SATCOM, 7 lost. The NSA technician in the corner stood up. We're being pinged from a high-orbit satellite. That's not one of ours. The CIA director's voice was razor sharp. Lock the room. Kill external feeds. I want electromagnetic shielding now. Steel shutters began to lower over the glass walls. The table's integrated comm system beeped once, then went silent. For the next 90 seconds, the Situation Room, arguably the most secure command hub on the planet, was disconnected from the outside world. Every head turned toward Jasmine. Even hers was momentarily surprised. This wasn't planned, she said calmly, but her eyes told a different story. Part calculation, part alarm. The NSA analyst typed furiously. It's a jamming frequency. Layered. Military-grade pulse. Origin, Sichuan Province, China. The room inhaled as one. The Secretary of Defense's knuckles whitened. This is a live breach, he growled. How the hell are they touching our airspace? They're not, Jasmine said, her voice steady but now sharp as steel. They're touching our blind spot. She stood, pulling a slim mat folder from her briefcase. No official seals. Just one name in all caps. Operation Black Canary. She opened it. Inside 4 pages. Satellite renderings from 2023. Intercepted drone relay footage. An electromagnetic signature pattern shaped like a fingerprint. 6 weeks ago, an experimental Chinese satellite went dark on public military registries. Officially decommissioned. Unofficially, it was moved to geostationary position above North America. She pointed at the page. Its purpose isn't surveillance, it's signal subversion. Not to listen, but to interrupt. To shut down command clarity during moments of strategic chaos. The CIA director scanned the diagram. And now they just tested it. The red lights flickered once more. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the system rebooted. Communications resumed. Satellite uplinks restored. The main display returned with a simple, chilling status message. Comms reestablished. 89.6 seconds lost. Trump stared at the screen. His lips moved slightly, not in speech, but in calculation. He knew. Everyone in the room saw it. Not surprise, not confusion, recognition. You knew this would happen. He whispered, more to himself than anyone. No, Jasmine replied, but someone on the other end knew you were in the room. The National Security Advisor turned. Are you saying this was a message? Jasmine nodded. This wasn't a breach. It was a ping, a signal, a pulse to remind someone that they're still listening. The Secretary of Defense stood. This is an act of cyber warfare. No, the CIA director said quietly, eyes locked on Trump. It's an extraction protocol. This is what you do after your asset is exposed. You prepare to sever the link. Trump sat back down, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. His legs suddenly seemed to weigh more than they should. His breathing slowed. His eyes flicked to the USB still plugged into the table, like a confession in digital form. "You don't understand the game you're playing," he muttered. "You think this is about speeches and transfers? It's bigger than any of you, bigger than this room." Jasmine leaned in. "Exactly, which is why you're no longer part of it." The final moment of the attack had done what no dossier could. It proved that Trump wasn't just compromised. He was connected, like an old node on a live wire still carrying foreign current. And now, the wire was exposed. The silence that followed the cyber attack wasn't just tactical, it was spiritual. The Situation Room had seen nuclear threats, terrorist hunts, and global war rooms come to life through projection screens. But this was something darker. It was a revelation of invisible control, of chains made not of steel, but of spreadsheets, shell corporations, and interest-bearing leverage. And Jasmine Crockett was holding the master key. She didn't wait for permission. She simply spoke. "We've spoken about signals. Now we talk about structure." From her folder, she retrieved a document marked with a triple seal header, the combined insignia of the IRS Criminal Investigations Division, the Federal Reserve's Financial Oversight Office, and the Office of Strategic Asset Control. The top line read, "Confidential Asset Influence Framework Report, Case File 81-3X Red." Jasmine laid it on the table like a verdict. This report took 2 years, 12 investigators, 3 forensic accounting AI platforms, and over 4.1 billion data points. The subject, Donald J. Trump. Trump's fingers twitched on the table, but he said nothing. Jasmine flipped the folder open to the first page. It displayed a side-by-side valuation. Trump Tower, Manhattan, loan application value to Deutsche Bank, $780 million. IRS declared value, same fiscal year, $76 million. The Secretary of Defense raised an eyebrow. "That's not a typo?" "No," Jasmine replied. "It's a mechanism used repeatedly across 7 states." She flipped to the next page. Golf courses, resorts, shell licensing rights, each one declared under multiple valuation regimes, one to secure massive loans, another to report minimal tax obligations. "Classic fraud," the National Security Advisor muttered. "Yes," Jasmine said, but that's not the point." She pulled out the next chart, a timeline overlaid with interest accumulation cycles. "The point is that these loans, artificially obtained, were purchased during Trump's insolvency years by offshore banks with Chinese ownership." She turned to Trump. "You weren't just bailed out. You were bought out." Now, even the CIA director was leaning in. Jasmine tapped the page. Between 2012 and 2018, over $2.3 billion in distressed Trump Organization debt was systematically acquired by 5 Chinese banks, all of which share controlling stakes with the People's Bank of China. She named them China Construction Bank, Bank of China, Hong Kong, Ping An Bank, Minsheng Bank, Ever Victory Holdings, a private vehicle used by the Central Financial Commission. Each debt acquisition was done quietly through shell entities, using Western intermediaries in the Virgin Islands, Panama, and Luxembourg. Each acquisition package, Jasmine continued, included debt restructuring agreements containing strategic consulting clauses. These clauses are legal camouflage for intelligence leverage. The room collectively froze. "Define consulting," the Secretary of Defense said grimly. Jasmine opened to the next page. Clause 9B of one debt package, she read, obligates the borrower, in this case the Trump Organization, to provide quarterly geopolitical analysis and forecasting on trade, defense posture, and global perception management, relevant to Chinese business interests. The CIA director exhaled, not a breath, but a signal of comprehension. They weren't just buying loyalty, they were buying intelligence, through financial pressure. Jasmine nodded. And there's more. She unfolded a final chart, a payment timeline. The dates corresponded precisely with major U.S. policy decisions. June 2017, U.S. backs off from South China Sea patrols, payment of $14.6 million posted to Trump licensing Lelantit. September 2018, suspension of tariffs on specific Chinese imports. $22.4 million wire transfer from Jiangsu Capital Management Lelantit. May 2019, sudden shift in Taiwan military aid tone, $7.8 million routed through Ever Victory Cayman Holdings. Trump slammed his hand on the table. Those are legitimate earnings, licensing, consulting, golf course branding. Jasmine didn't flinch. Every payment followed a policy shift, Every earning matched a Chinese strategic interest. Every dollar was tied to a lever. The National Security Advisor whispered, "He wasn't compromised through blackmail. He was leased, like a commodity." Jasmine's final document landed like a stone. It was the original debt instrument, the promissory note signed by Trump guaranteeing a $980 million restructuring loan, stamped with red ink on the final page. Guarantor, Donald J. Trump, in personal capacity. Trump's signature, unmistakable, sprawled across the bottom in his usual sharp angles and oversized flourish. "You didn't just risk assets," Jasmine said softly. "You mortgaged yourself." Trump leaned back, or rather, he collapsed backward into his chair. His chest rose unevenly. His shoulders slumped like a man under invisible weight, because now the weight was visible, and everyone in the room saw it. Donald Trump sat motionless. His frame, once occupying the room like a monument to bravado, now seemed smaller, deflated, as if every dollar Jasmine Crockett had just exposed had taken a sliver of air from his lungs. But Jasmine wasn't done. She retrieved the final file from her briefcase, a thick bundle sealed with 3 crests embossed into the cover. The Department of the Treasury, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Central Intelligence Agency. The header read, Joint Task Force 88, Intelligence. Summary brief, Operation Dragon's Debt, clearance level, Delta 1, eyes only. She set it down with ceremonial weight. The room, already strained by revelations, seemed to constrict tighter. Even the CIA director sat forward, no longer concealing curiosity. The Secretary of Defense adjusted his uniform, not out of discomfort, but to prepare for consequence. Jasmine began, "This is the conclusive result of a 2-year tri-agency investigation into foreign financial leverage structures targeting U.S. political figures. It outlines a deliberate multi-phase infiltration strategy by the Chinese Communist Party, codenamed Operation Dragon's Debt." She opened to the first page. The operation's objective was clear: create asymmetric financial dependency on high-influence Americans, particularly those with fluid ethical standards and significant debt exposure. Donald Trump was the primary node. She turned the page. A 3D flowchart glowed on the display screen, a digital web of transactions, timelines, and strategic objectives. At the center, Trump Organization, radiating outward: Chinese banks, state-backed shell firms, geopolitical policy shifts. Each spoke of the wheel contained annotations in red. Q2, leverage point established, Macau licensing expansion. Q4, softening rhetoric on Huawei, payment delivered. Trade war pivot, trigger confirmed. The National Security Advisor whispered, "They built a financial kill switch." Jasmine nodded. Operation Dragon's Debt was not about blackmail, it was about binding, like silk over steel. Make the target's fortunes rise with cooperation and collapse upon defiance. She opened to the report's most damning section, a transcript, NSA intercept, redacted but legible. Voice 1, MSS handler. "His loyalty is measured in liquidity. When the tide is high, he sails for us." Voice 2, internal Chinese intel log. "Do not force him. He does not see the leash. That makes him reliable." Trump's face twitched, but he said nothing. Jasmine turned the final pages. The debt agreements included sunset clauses, triggers that activated upon specific events. One clause activated if the U.S. government designated the CCP as a hostile actor. Another triggered financial penalties if Trump supported arms sales to Taiwan. Each clause corresponded with major foreign policy reversals. She pointed to one policy arc. Dec 2016, Trump tweets support for Taiwan. Dec 2016, 6 hours later, emergency conference call with China Construction Bank. Dec 2016, next day, Trump reverses statement. The CIA director didn't speak. He didn't need to. Jasmine placed the last piece, a handwritten memo recovered from an internal CCP strategy binder obtained through human intelligence, HUMINT channels. Its date, October 2019. Phase 5 success. American asset continues to deliver under economic pressure. Monitoring Western media manipulation efficiency. Red Lantern fully integrated. She looked up, her voice low but commanding. Trump wasn't colluding with China in secret meetings. He was doing it through the loan payments. He didn't need to be a spy. He was a dependent asset, one who didn't even know how much of himself had been sold. Silence reigned. Then the CIA director spoke, voice grave. "We're not just looking at foreign influence. We're looking at a counterintelligence failure of generational scale." The Secretary of Defense stood slowly. Every decision involving China in the last 8 years needs to be reviewed. Every military briefing, every policy memo, the National Security Advisor's tone turned surgical. This isn't politics, this is national reconstruction. And still, Trump said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Everything that had protected him, the branding, the bravado, the billion-dollar illusion, had evaporated under the harsh light of documented truth. And as Jasmine began to stack the files again, slowly, precisely, it wasn't a politician she looked at across the table. It was a man who had become a cautionary tale. The Situation Room was silent, but the air inside was anything but still. You could feel it, the gravitational pull of consequence settling on the shoulders of everyone present. Jasmine Crockett had just done what no one had dared, no one had prepared for. She'd unveiled the entire machinery of foreign financial occupation. Not tanks, not hackers, but paper trails and promissory notes, a quiet conquest. She leaned back in her chair, eyes scanning the table. The once unshakable Trump now looked empty. Not defeated in combat, but drained by the weight of exposure. It wasn't shame. It was the cold realization that the room finally saw him. Not the illusion, not the spectacle, but the truth beneath the tailored suit and calculated smirk. The CIA director stood. This meeting is to be sealed under Tier 1 classification until further notice. Copies of the Joint Task Force report will be delivered to a restricted review panel within 12 hours. The Secretary of Defense added, "The Joint Chiefs must be briefed immediately. All diplomatic interactions with Beijing are to be rerouted through secured clearance channels, starting now." Trump didn't move. He didn't speak, because he understood. This wasn't the end of a presidency. It wasn't the end of a reputation. It was the end of control, the currency he'd dealt in his entire life. Jasmine stood, slow, deliberate. She gathered the documents, one by one, each stack now heavy not just with facts, but with fate. She looked across the table once more, letting her voice carry the final verdict. When we swear to protect the Constitution, we do not swear to protect our portfolios, our brands, or our influence. She paused, then delivered the final line, clear and immortal. Some debts can be erased with money, but the ones that matter most are repaid with loyalty. And loyalty, when sold, cannot be bought back. Silence. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of judgment, history, and irreversible consequence. Trump slowly turned his gaze toward Jasmine. His voice came out dry, ragged. What happens now? It wasn't defiance. It was fear. And Jasmine, without even glancing at him, replied, "Now? Now the country decides if democracy is still worth defending." She placed the final envelope, now empty, at the center of the table, like a tombstone. Then she turned and walked out. No mic drop. No drama. Just truth, well delivered and irreversible. The story you just witnessed isn't just about power or politics or billion-dollar secrets. It's about something far more personal. The quiet transactions we all make, every day, in exchange for convenience, silence, and short-term comfort. We may never hold office. We may never owe billions. But we all carry debts. To truth, to those we love, to the principles we say we stand for. In a world where attention is bought, loyalty is sold, and truth is drowned by noise, the most powerful thing you can do is stay awake. Question everything. Choose courage over comfort. Because silence, in the face of corruption, is its most loyal accomplice.